me again, and I want to do a very long overdue response to username Wineisyourfriend, who in his last video titled "Morality is not barred from Christianity, conscience is not a ghost," sort of response to my two videos, Atheism and Objective Morality, parts 1 and 2. He mentioned at the 8:35 mark in his video something about slavery, biblical slavery, that he talked about into the end of that video. I want to respond to those comments. However, I want to have some preliminary things to say on my own about biblical slavery and about its relation to atheism. So what I want to do is start off with these comments and then get into the comments that Wineisyourfriend made. Now, the first thing I want to deal with is the fact that atheists making moral judgments. Atheism is subjective morality. It changes from person to person. It's dependent on that person's opinion. It never leaves what's between their ears, and they have no transcendent moral value. If you have no objective moral value to appeal to, then you can never really call anything that anyone else does truly wrong, because it's your opinion that it's wrong. Well, they're human too, and they have an opinion that it's right. So you can't call rape wrong, you can't call anything wrong, because if your opinion is the ultimate standard, then nothing is truly wrong, because as long as somebody else thinks it's right, for you to hold a different opinion and then push that opinion on them is oppression. The big thing you say that atheists say that we do, right? My second point is, why aren't the positive points of biblical slavery covered? And what I mean by that I'll get into a minute. But what I want to briefly say is, when you're going to critique something, it seems like you'd show both sides of it if you're trying to be fair and balanced. Now, I know in this particular video you didn't have much time left, but in general, speaking to atheists who I see do videos on this subject, there's never any fair critiques made. My third point is that guidelines do not equal approval. Yes, the Bible gives guidelines on slavery. It doesn't mean that God thinks this is the optimal situation, okay? Slavery is never called explicitly wrong, but it's never even called something that the way things should be either. Let me give you another example, polygamy. Jesus Christ, when talking about divorce, made some implicit statements about polygamy. He said from the beginning it was not so. In other words, man, one woman for life is the optimal situation, yet in the Torah we find guidelines on polygamy. So if from the beginning it was not so, why would God give guidelines for polygamy? Well, we're going to get into that, but that's an example, just like slavery, where guidelines don't mean that that's the way God wanted it to be, as atheists portray. Number 4, the Bible's regulations sought to protect with equal respect the slave and the slave owner, as you'll see if you read the verses. Okay, so the verses, briefly, I have in my notebook here, I took some notes, can be very, you can look these up for yourself if you want to read. Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 32 are peppered with slavery references. Leviticus 25, verses 39 to 55, and then there's a few verses here and there in Deuteronomy 15, Deuteronomy 23, and chapter 24, verse 14. Those are your major scriptures that the Bible provides on slavery. So, before we get into this, I want to cover what the atheists will never cover, the positive points. Deuteronomy 24:14, number 1, as expressly written that God said, do not oppress your slaves. Do not treat them badly, whether they are Hebrew or Gentile slaves. Number 2, slaves could go free of their own volition. What does that mean? Well, they were enslaved, whether they were sold into slavery or sold themselves into slavery until the Jubilee year, at which time they could go free. However, if they could raise the redemption price before then, they could go free on their own, and the owner could not stop them. So they could go free of their own volition. See also Jeremiah 34:14, where God rebukes the people for not following that rule. Number 3, if a master strikes a slave and injures him, such as putting out his eye or breaking a tooth or something like that, the slave could automatically go free. Notice that the Babylonian and Hittite codes at the time did not have such. The master could do that and get away. Slaves had to keep the Sabbath day, which means they could not be forced to work at least one day a week. Number 5, if a Hebrew fell on hard times, he could sell himself into slavery to one of his kinsmen. Well, what does that mean? Well, how is that a good thing? Well, it kept him from starving. See, in America today, we have a lot of safety nets. Some are good, some are bad, because they enable people not to try. However, there are some good safety nets, and the Roman Empire and other cultures had them through history. However, a lot of cultures didn't, and if your family fell on hard times or your crops went bad, guess what? You died. This is a safety net. It's a good thing, and the person could go free when they could raise the redemption price or the Jubilee year. Now, also in Deuteronomy 15:14, it talks about when the slave went free, that the slave owner or the servant master, whatever you want to call him, was to give of this person of his flock, of his food, and of his wine vat. He was to not send him out empty-handed, but with his hands full, more than he could carry. Deuteronomy 13:15, if a slave escaped from another town or another area, they were not to return him. And I think it would be pretty easy to say that the point there is he probably left a bad situation, and if he did, the other person that found him was not allowed to take him back. In fact, that slave was then allowed to choose a place to live in that township.